My mother-in-law pointed a manicured finger at me from the gallery. She is faking it. My husband smirked, adjusting his custom Italian tie. She pulls this every time she is backed into a corner. The judge nodded, clearly swayed by his performance. Then the room began to spin. My legs gave out, sending me crashing to the hardwood floor. A man I had not seen in years, a military doctor, rushed from the back row. "Your Honor, she needs help right now." Seconds later, he was screaming for someone to call help. Everyone in the courtroom froze, until the judge finally stood up. The heavy oak doors of the Fulton County Courthouse felt like the gates of a prison. I sat at the petitioner table, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles turned white. Across from me sat Marcus, the man I had pledged my life to 5 years ago. He looked sharp in a navy suit, exuding the kind of arrogant confidence that only a tech executive could muster. We were here for our final divorce hearing, and I thought I had prepared myself for every dirty trick he could possibly play. I was wrong. Marcus leaned forward and slid a thick manila folder toward the judge. "Your Honor, my legal team has uncovered some troubling information regarding my wife's finances," he said, his voice dripping with practiced concern. "It appears Maya has been systematically hiding assets in offshore accounts and shell companies for the past 3 years. She has deliberately misrepresented her income to this court." I felt the air leave my lungs. What was he talking about? I was a medical data analyst. I worked 60-hour weeks on defense contracts and paid every bill in our household while he funneled his massive salary into luxury cars and golf club memberships. I had hidden nothing. But Marcus was not finished. Because of this egregious financial deception, he continued looking at the judge with wide, innocent eyes. "I am officially petitioning for permanent spousal support. She needs to pay alimony to maintain the standard of living I have become accustomed to during this marriage." A harsh, grating laugh echoed from the gallery behind me. I did not even have to turn around to know it was Beatrice. She had always hated me, always believed I was beneath her precious son because I came from a working-class neighborhood on the south side instead of her elite gated community. Well, it is about time someone exposed her. Beatrice Stage whispered to the woman sitting next to her. "You can take the girl out of the ghetto, but you cannot take the ghetto out of the girl. Always scheming and hustling for $1. The woman beside her giggled. It was Chloe, his sister-in-law. Chloe was a white woman who had married into the family 2 years ago and immediately became Beatrice's golden child. Chloe lived a life of leisure funded entirely by credit cards she had secretly opened under my business accounts. She flipped her blonde hair over her shoulder and sighed loudly. "Honestly, Beatrice, it is just embarrassing. Look at her cheap suit. She does not even know how to present herself in federal court. No wonder Marcus is leaving her. She is completely out of her depth." The audacity of their whispers made my blood boil. Chloe was sitting there carrying an expensive designer bag that I was unknowingly paying for, judging my work ethic. Beatrice was nodding along, validating every racist and classist microaggression Chloe threw my way. They were a united front of toxicity determined to break me down. I looked at my lawyer, expecting him to object to the forged documents Marcus had just submitted. But my lawyer was furiously flipping through the pages, looking completely blindsided by the ambush. I could not stay silent any longer. I had spent 5 years biting my tongue to keep the peace. I had endured Marcus taking credit for my ideas, belittling my background, and gaslighting me into believing I was the problem in our marriage. I had endured his mother's constant slights and his sister-in-law's weaponized privilege. I placed my hands flat on the heavy wooden table and pushed my chair back. The wood scraped loudly against the floor, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. "Your Honor, I need to speak," I said, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of the courtroom. "Those documents are completely fabricated. I have never hidden a single dime. Marcus is the one who has drained our joint accounts to fund his lifestyle." I braced my legs to stand up fully, ready to defend my name and my hard-earned career. I was ready to expose his lies right there on the record. But as I locked my knees and pushed myself upward, something went terribly wrong. A terrifying wave of dizziness hit me like a physical blow. The edges of my vision darkened, blurring the judge and the court reporter. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears, drowning out the heavy wooden sound of the gavel. A profound heat flared in my chest and quickly spread to my throat. I tried to take a deep breath, but my airway felt constricted, as if an invisible hand was wrapping tightly around my neck. The bright courtroom lights above me seemed to strobe and flash aggressively. I reached out blindly, trying to grab the edge of the table to stabilize myself, but my fingers felt numb and unresponsive. My heart began to pound erratically against my ribs, racing at a terrifying speed that sent a cold sweat pouring down my spine. The smirk on Marcus's face twisted into a distorted blur. The whispers from Beatrice and Chloe faded into a muffled echo. I tried to form words to say that something was horribly wrong, but my lips would not move. The last thing I felt was the ground rushing up to meet me. The impact sent a violent shockwave through my jaw and shoulder. I lay on the polished oak planks, my cheek pressed against the cold grain of the wood. The majestic ceiling of the courtroom spun in slow, sickening circles above me. I tried to push myself up on my elbows, but my arms were entirely devoid of strength. They trembled uncontrollably, buckling under the mere weight of my own shoulders. A strange metallic taste flooded my mouth. I could hear the sharp intake of breath from the gallery, a collective gasp from the strangers sitting in the back rows now. But from the table just a few feet away, there was no gasp of concern. There was only a heavy, exasperated sigh. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear the gray fog creeping into the corners of my vision. Through the blur, I saw Marcus leaning back in his leather chair. He did not jump up. He did not rush to my side. He simply crossed his arms over his tailored chest and rolled his eyes toward the vaulted ceiling. He actually let out a short, breathy chuckle of disbelief. To him, my collapsing body was not a medical emergency situation. It was an inconvenience. It was just another hurdle in his master plan to bleed me dry. I moved my lips, trying to ask him for help, but only a dry rasp escaped my throat. He looked down at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. He adjusted his cuffs, making sure his expensive watch was perfectly visible, and shook his head as if I had just spilled coffee on his favorite rug. A sharp, shrill voice sliced through the heavy air of the courtroom. It was Beatrice. She jumped up from her seat in the front row seating of the gallery, her heavy gold bracelets clinking together as she pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. "She is faking it!" Beatrice yelled, her voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "Look at her. She pulls this exact same stunt every single time she is backed into a corner." She marched right up to the wooden divider separating the gallery from the court floor, leaning over it like a spectator at a circus. "Do not let her fool you, Your Honor. This is what people from her neighborhood do when they get caught lying. They play the victim. They put on a show." Beatrice looked around the room, making eye contact with the bailiff and the court reporter actively campaigning for their agreement. "She is completely fine. Tell her to get up and stop wasting our very valuable time." Beside her, Chloe let out a loud, exaggerated scoff. She did not even bother to stand up. Instead, Chloe casually crossed her legs, smoothing down the fabric of a designer skirt that I had paid for 3 months ago. She reached into her oversized leather tote bag and pulled out a crystal nail file. The sound of her filing, her nails cut through the sudden silence of the room, a deliberate display of utter boredom. "God, this is just so typical," Chloe said, speaking loudly enough for the judge to hear. "I told you she would pull a dramatic performance today, Beatrice. It is honestly embarrassing to watch." Chloe inspected her thumbnail, blew off the dust, and continued filing. "Can we just wrap this up? I have a spa appointment at 2 today, and I really do not want to miss my massage just because Maya decided to throw a temper tantrum on the floor." I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to tell the room that I could not breathe, that my heart was hammering a dangerous, irregular rhythm against my ribcage. The room was growing darker, the edges of my vision tunneling into a narrow pinprick of light. I dragged my fingernails against the floor, fighting for any anchor to reality. My lungs burned. Every inhale felt like drawing broken glass down my throat. This was not a panic attack. I had experienced stress before. I had survived intense pressure working for military contractors, but this was a total systemic failure. My body was shutting down. I could feel my organs misfiring, a silent poison ravaging my nervous system. I tried to look at my lawyer, but he was simply standing there with his mouth open, paralyzed by the sheer audacity of my husband and his family. The judge, a man known for his strict adherence to courtroom decorum, was losing his patience. He did not see a woman dying on his floor. He saw a disgruntled wife throwing a hysterical fit to avoid a devastating financial ruling. His face reddened with irritation as he looked down at me from his elevated bench. He reached for his heavy wooden gavel and slammed it down against the sounding block. The sharp crack reverberated through my aching skull like a gunshot. "Order in my courtroom!" The judge bellowed, his voice booming over the sound of Chloe using her nail file. "Madam, I will not tolerate these childish theatrics in my jurisdiction. This is a federal court, not a daytime soap opera. Get up from the floor immediately and take your seat, or I will hold you in contempt." Marcus seized the opportunity to play the weary, long-suffering husband. He stood up slowly, buttoning his suit jacket with an air of dignified resignation. "I apologize for my wife and her behavior." "Your Honor," Marcus said smoothly, his voice laced with fake embarrassment. "She has a history of these emotional outbursts whenever she faces accountability. I brought the financial documents today to reveal the truth, and clearly the truth was too much for her to handle. I respectfully request that we proceed with the ruling. She is perfectly capable of listening from the floor if she refuses to sit in her chair." The injustice of his words was suffocating. He painted me a liar choking on nothing but air. The polished floor pressed against my cheek as my lungs screamed for oxygen. My vision narrowed, focusing on the scuffed toe of the bailiff shoe. The man did not move to help. He simply stood there waiting for the judge to issue a directive. Every muscle in my chest contracted violently, trying to force air down a windpipe that felt filled with wet cement. Chloe filing her nails echoed in my ears alongside the rhythmic thudding of my failing heart. Marcus shifted his weight, adjusting his jacket, and sighing with exhaustion. A loud commotion erupted from the back rows. Heavy footsteps pounded against the central aisle carpet, moving with terrifying velocity. Someone was running directly toward the petitioner table. The bailiff finally stepped forward, raising a hand to block the approaching figure. "Sir, you need to remain seated," the bailiff shouted loudly. "You cannot cross the bar." The man did not slow down. He ignored the command. He sidestepped the heavy gate and vaulted over the low door separating the gallery from the legal floor. He moved with a disciplined precision that caught the security off guard. He hit the ground beside me, sliding the last 2 feet on his knees until his face hovered directly above mine. I recognized the sharp jawline and piercing eyes immediately. It was Dr. Harrison Pierce. We had served together during my time as a civilian contractor for the Department of Defense. I spent countless hours analyzing trauma data, while he operated on the front lines, saving lives under impossible conditions. Seeing him in this sterile courtroom felt like a hallucination born from a dying brain. He was supposed to be an expert witness for a different trial down the hall. Yet here he was, pressing 2 steady fingers against the pulse point right on my neck. "Maya, stay with me." Harrison commanded, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that completely ignored the chaos unfolding around us. His tone was not frantic. It was the terrifying calm of a military trauma surgeon assessing a critical casualty. He leaned closer, tilting my chin back to open my airway. His eyes scanned my face, dropping to my neck and then to my chest. He pressed his ear near my mouth, listening for breath sounds that simply were not there. "Her airway is completely compromised," Harrison yelled, projecting his voice toward the paralyzed court staff. "Her heart rate is dropping to dangerous levels. She is in active anaphylactic shock. Someone call emergency services right now. Tell them we have a code blue with rapidly closing airways. We need a crash cart and epinephrine immediately." The sheer volume and authority of his voice finally shattered the spell holding the room hostage. The court reporter scrambled out of her chair, reaching frantically for the phone on her desk. The bailiff reached for his radio, but Marcus violently stepped between Harrison and my body. "Get your hands off my wife!" Marcus snarled, his voice dripping with territorial rage. He grabbed Harrison by the shoulder, attempting to rip him away from me. "She does not need a doctor or an ambulance. She needs to stop putting on this pathetic show for the judge. She is prone to severe panic attacks whenever she feels cornered financially. I am her husband, and I am telling you to step back and let her calm down. The physical contact was a massive mistake. Harrison did not just shrug off the hand, he reacted with the ingrained muscle memory of a soldier. In one fluid motion, Harrison twisted his shoulder, broke Marcus' grip, and delivered a sharp, rigid shove to the center of his chest. The impact sent Marcus stumbling backward until his calves hit the table, sitting him heavily. "Do not touch me," Harrison warned, his voice wrapping the entire room in a chilling blanket of deadly seriousness. "Do not presume to tell me what a panic attack looks like. I have spent a decade treating combat trauma. Your wife is not hyperventilating. Her lips are cyanotic. Her capillary refill is non-existent. Her organs are beginning to shut down from oxygen deprivation. She is dying right in front of you." Beatrice let out a loud gasp from the front row. "How dare you assault my son?" she screeched, slamming her hands against the divider. "Your Honor, are you going to allow this lunatic to barge into your courtroom and assault a respected businessman? He is probably one of her low-class friends hired to stage this disruption. Arrest him immediately." The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, demanding order, but the sound barely registered in my fading consciousness. My eyes rolled back, fighting to focus on Harrison. The harsh fluorescent lights transformed into a blinding halo. He ignored the screaming women in the gallery and the judge demanding silence. He ignored Marcus scrambling back to his feet with a humiliated flush creeping up his neck. Harrison stripped off his jacket, rolled it into a tight cylinder, and wedged it under my shoulders to elevate my chest and maximize whatever minimal airflow I had left. "Listen to me," Harrison said, leaning so close his breath warmed my freezing cheek. "You are going to hold on, Maya. You survived 12-hour shifts in bunker lockdowns. You are not going to let a cheap, tailored suit take you out. Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." I focused every remaining ounce of energy in my body toward my right hand. My fingers twitched weakly against his palm. It was a pathetic response, but it was enough. "You see that right there?" Marcus yelled, pointing a trembling finger at my hand. "She is fully conscious right now. She is responding to him now. I demand you remove this man from my wife. She is experiencing anxiety because she got caught hiding assets. I have the medical proxy here. I make the decisions regarding her health care, and I say she is completely fine. She does not need a doctor now." Harrison did not even blink at the piece of paper Marcus was waving in his face. Instead, he reached into the breast pocket of his crisp white shirt and pulled out a solid brass badge secured to a heavy leather credential wallet. He flipped it open with a practiced flick of his wrist and shoved it directly into Marcus' line of sight. "Department of Defense Medical Command," Harrison stated, his voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. "I am a federally appointed trauma surgeon, and my patient is currently in a state of acute medical distress. Your civilian proxy means absolutely nothing when a human life is actively expiring on the floor of a federal building. Step back immediately before I have the bailiff arrest you for interfering with a federal medical officer." Marcus stumbled backward, his arrogant facade cracking for the very first time since the divorce proceedings began. His eyes darted frantically from the gleaming brass badge to the heavy oak gavel the judge was still gripping tightly. The judge had finally stopped banging the wooden block, his expression shifting from extreme annoyance to genuine, palpable concern. He signaled to the armed bailiff to stand down and firmly instructed everyone to allow Harrison to continue his emergency assessment. Harrison turned his full attention back to me, ignoring the murmurs rippling through the room. He unbuttoned the top collar of my silk blouse and pressed his fingers firmly against the swollen glands at the base of my throat. He pulled a small, high-powered pen light from his trouser pocket and flashed the beam across my eyes, watching my pupils fail to constrict. He noted the dangerous bluish tint rapidly spreading across my lips and the terrifying raised rash breaking out along my jawline. "This is not a panic attack," Harrison announced, his voice carrying effortlessly to every quiet corner of the stunned courtroom. "She is experiencing rapid systemic organ failure. Look at the presentation of the sclera and the severe localized edema forming around her airway. These are the exact physiological markers of heavy metal poisoning, specifically acute lithium toxicity. A collective horrified gasp rippled through the gallery seating. Beatrice dropped her manicured hand to her side, the cruel, mocking smirk completely vanishing from her heavily powdered face. Chloe stopped filing her nails mid-stroke, the crystal files slipping from her fingers and clattering loudly onto the polished wooden floor. Marcus stood completely paralyzed, his jaw slack as he stared down at my trembling, gasping body. I know this because I served as her primary care physician during her deployment as a civilian contractor in a hostile combat zone. Harrison continued, his gaze narrowing dangerously as he locked eyes with my husband. And according to her heavily classified Department of Defense medical file, which I personally authored and maintained, Maya is deathly allergic to lithium compounds. A microdose would put her in the intensive care unit. A concentrated dose like this is a lethal event. Her body is literally tearing itself apart right now, attempting to process a restricted toxin it cannot metabolize. Harrison slowly stood up, letting my heavy head rest gently against his rolled suit jacket. He squared his broad shoulders and faced my husband head-on. He pointed an accusatory, unwavering finger directly at Marcus. Someone introduced a massive quantity of a deadly allergen into her system within the last 2 hours. She has been sitting at this defense table the entire morning without leaving my line of sight. The only thing she ingested today was the iced coffee you handed her in the hallway right before we entered these double doors. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that precedes a violent, destructive storm. Every single eye in the room shifted away from my gasping form on the floor and locked onto Marcus. The arrogant tech executive suddenly looked incredibly small and incredibly guilty. His face drained of all natural color, taking on a sickly hue. He opened his mouth to defend himself, to spin another elaborate web of lies for the court, but no sound came out. He was completely exposed in front of the judge. "Who poisoned her?" Harrison demanded, his voice dropping an octave into a dangerous, threatening register that commanded instant obedience. "I will ask you one more time for the official court record. Who knowingly slipped a lethal dose of a heavily restricted psychiatric medication into her coffee?" Marcus took another desperate step backward, his hip hitting the sharp edge of the wooden railing. He looked frantically toward the gallery, seeking an escape route or help from his mother. But Beatrice was shrinking back into her wooden seat, pressing a shaking hand over her mouth. Chloe was staring at Marcus with wide, terrified eyes, realizing the severe criminal gravity of the situation they were suddenly trapped in. The judge did not hesitate for another second. "Bailiff, secure this room immediately," the judge barked, his voice echoing with absolute authority over the silent crowd. "Nobody enters or exits this courtroom until the federal authorities arrive. Lock the heavy doors right now, and somebody get the paramedics in here. We have an active crime scene and a critical medical emergency." The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom slammed shut with a resounding thud. The distinct metallic click of the deadbolt locking echoed through the high vaulted ceiling. We were completely sealed inside. The bailiff grabbed his shoulder radio, shouting rapid emergency codes to the building security team downstairs. The sound of distant ambulance sirens began to wail outside the courthouse building, growing louder and more frantic with every passing second. My vision was fading fast. The sharp edges of the room dissolved into a fuzzy gray static. The pain in my chest was becoming unbearable, a crushing, burning weight that made every attempted breath feel like inhaling liquid fire. My lungs were giving out. The darkness was pulling me under, promising a silent relief from the burning agony tearing through my nervous system. Through the rapidly shrinking tunnel of my vision, I could see the heavy wooden doors burst open again. A team of emergency paramedics rushed through the gap, dragging a heavy red crash cart and shouting complex medical jargon. Harrison was yelling out my vital statistics to them, seamlessly integrating with the first response team. He directed them to prepare the epinephrine syringes and establish an immediate intravenous line. But as the paramedics swarmed around me, blocking the bright overhead fluorescent lights, my failing eyes caught one final terrifying detail. While the entire room was entirely focused on saving my slipping life, Marcus had quietly slipped into the dark shadows near the petitioner table. He was leaning heavily against the dark wood, his back deliberately turned to the judge and the distracted bailiff. His hands were shaking violently as he pulled his smartphone from his tailored suit pocket. I watched through half-closed, heavy eyes as his thumbs flew across the brightly illuminated screen. He was not calling for legal help. He was not contacting his expensive defense attorney. He was frantically swiping through his encrypted messaging application. I could clearly see the distinct red delete icons flashing across the glass surface. He was rapidly erasing entire threads of text messages. He was destroying the digital evidence. He was deleting the undeniable trail of the poison he had just fed me. The room spun one final violent time, the high-pitched sound of the sirens blending with Harrison shouting my name, before the heavy darkness finally swallowed me whole. The rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor pierced the suffocating darkness. My eyelids felt woven from solid lead. I fought the immense weight, forcing them to flutter open. The harsh glare of fluorescent lights blinded me, sending a sharp spike of pain into my temples. My vision swam in gray circles before focusing on the drop ceiling of the intensive care unit. A thick plastic oxygen mask covered my face, pushing cool air into my burning lungs. Every muscle throbbed with a deep toxic ache. I tried to shift my weight against the stiff pillows, but my arms were completely unresponsive, tethered to the bed rails by a network of clear plastic tubing, feeding aggressive intravenous fluids into my battered veins. I turned my head, the rough fabric scratching my cheek. A shadow moved in the corner of the glass-walled room. Marcus was sitting in a vinyl chair pulled directly up to my bedside, leaning forward with his face buried in his hands. He looked like the picture-perfect image of a devastated, terrified husband waiting for his injured wife. As I let out a weak groan through the mask, Marcus snapped his head up. A nurse in pale blue scrubs stood opposite my bed, adjusting the flow rate on a digital pump. Marcus immediately lunged forward, grabbing my limp hand. He squeezed my fingers tightly and let out a loud, shuddering breath. "Oh, thank God," Marcus gasped, his voice thick with manufactured emotion. "Thank God you are finally awake, Maya. I have been sitting right here for hours. I was so terrified that I was going to lose you." He pressed a gentle kiss against my knuckles, his eyes shining with completely fake tears. The young nurse offered a warm, sympathetic smile. "She has a very strong constitution," the nurse said, checking the digital readout on the wall monitor. "The medical team managed to flush the heavy toxins from her system just in time. She is incredibly lucky you were there to authorize the emergency treatments as her official medical proxy. You have been such a remarkably devoted husband, sitting vigil by her bedside all night. Let me inform the attending physician that she has finally regained consciousness. He will want to do an assessment right away." Marcus offered the nurse a brave, watery smile. "Thank you for everything you are doing to save my wife," he replied softly. The nurse nodded kindly and stepped out of the intensive care room. The heavy door swung shut behind her, the magnetic lock clicking firmly into place to seal the room. The very millisecond the door latched, the atmosphere inside violently shifted. The weeping, devoted husband vanished into thin air. Marcus instantly dropped my hand, letting my arm fall limply back onto the mattress. He reached into his tailored suit jacket, pulled out a silk handkerchief, and casually wiped away the non-existent tears from his eyes. He stood up smoothly, his posture shifting from hunched misery to towering, arrogant dominance. His face settled into a cold, hard mask of absolute calculation. He walked over to his expensive leather briefcase and snapped the brass latches open. He pulled out a thick stack of stapled legal-sized papers and a heavy silver fountain pen. He walked back to my bedside, grabbed the rolling hospital tray table, and violently yanked it over my chest. He slammed the thick stack of papers down onto the hard plastic surface. The loud smack echoed sharply in the quiet room. "Do you really think a ridiculous courtroom stunt with some rogue military doctor was going to save you?" Marcus sneered, his voice dropping into a vicious whisper. "You are so incredibly naive, Maya. Harrison Pierce might have played the hero for 5 minutes, but I am still your legally wedded husband. I am your sole medical proxy. I control what happens in this hospital room, and I control whether or not you walk out of here alive." He leaned over the bed, pressing his hands flat against the tray table, trapping me beneath it. His face was only inches from mine. I tried to speak, to scream for the nurse, but only a pathetic squeak escaped from beneath the mask. My throat was completely raw and swollen from the severe allergic reaction. Marcus chuckled darkly at my helpless state. He tapped the silver pen against the top page of the legal document. "This is a comprehensive, irrevocable power of attorney," he explained, his eyes locking onto mine with deadly intent. "It legally grants me total, undisputed control over your grandmother's estate, your personal investment portfolios, and every single asset you have been desperately trying to hide from the divorce settlement." He picked up the silver pen and wedged it between my weak, trembling fingers. "You are going to sign every page of this document right now," Marcus ordered. "If you do not sign it, I will walk out into that hallway and exercise my absolute legal right as your medical proxy. I will look that sweet, gullible nurse in the eye and firmly instruct her to withdraw all your life-saving interventions. I will tell the attending doctor it violates your personal religious beliefs to receive artificial chemical treatments. I will refuse the final round of dialysis you need to clear the lithium from your bloodstream." My heart monitor began to beep faster, the green line jumping erratically across the dark screen as sheer panic flooded my system. Marcus was not making an idle threat. He had already proven he was perfectly willing to murder me in a federal courthouse. He would not hesitate to finish the job in a sterile hospital bed. "I am your husband, Maya," he whispered, leaning close enough for me to smell the stale coffee on his breath. "The hospital staff will listen to my directives without question. They will literally unplug your machines and watch you expire, and do it legally." He pressed his thumb down hard on my injured wrist, forcing my hand to grip the silver pen tightly. The pain flared hot and sharp, but I lacked the physical strength to pull away. "You have exactly two choices right now," Marcus stated, his eyes devoid of any human empathy. "You can sign away the estate, surrender the money, and live to walk out of this hospital broken and penniless. Or you can refuse, and I will happily plan a beautiful, expensive funeral for my tragically deceased wife. Sign the damn paper, Maya." Marcus pressed the silver pen forcefully into my trembling hand, the cold metal biting sharply into my bruised skin as a frantic, loud commotion suddenly erupted in the quiet ICU hallway. A woman's voice, pitched artificially high and trembling with manufactured panic, echoed clearly through the thick glass walls of my room. "Please, you have to let me see her right now," the voice pleaded loudly. "She is my sister, and I cannot breathe because I am just so worried about her." The heavy door to my private hospital room burst open with a loud thud. Chloe stumbled inside, clutching a designer tissue to her perfectly contoured face. A flustered hospital security guard hovered anxiously in the doorway, completely disarmed by her brilliant performance. He whispered sympathetically that she only had a few minutes. Chloe offered him a fragile, tearful nod that belonged in a movie. The exact moment the heavy door clicked shut, the fake tears vanished completely. "Hospital staff are so incredibly gullible," Chloe muttered, casually smoothing her cashmere sweater. "A few fake tears, and they part like the Red Sea." She marched directly to the foot of my bed, glaring down with absolute contempt. She did not bother to ask how I was feeling after I nearly died. Her icy blue eyes darted immediately to the legal documents resting on my tray table. "Have you signed them yet?" Chloe demanded aggressively, crossing her arms over her chest. "We do not have time for you to play the stubborn martyr today, Maya. Sign those legal papers immediately." Marcus stepped back slightly willingly, allowing his sister-in-law to take the offensive lead. "She is being ridiculous and stubborn," Marcus sneered, adjusting his expensive silk tie with a look of pure disgust. "She genuinely thinks she still has some kind of leverage in this terrible situation." Chloe let out a sharp, grating laugh that echoed painfully in my aching, swollen head. "Leverage," Chloe mocked, pointing a sharply manicured finger straight at my face. "Look at yourself. You are lying helpless in a sterile hospital bed attached to a dozen different plastic tubes. You have absolutely nothing left to bargain with. You are completely and utterly at our mercy." She stepped closer, the cloying scent of her expensive floral perfume instantly nauseating me. "Do you have any idea how much of an inconvenience your little courthouse stunt has been for me today?" she asked, vibrating with intense narcissistic outrage. I have a first-class flight booked for Aspen early tomorrow morning. I am supposed to be checking into a five-star ski resort. Her face flushed with entitled anger. But instead of packing, I am stuck in this disgusting hospital dealing with your drama. And to make matters worse, my booking agent just called to tell me the payment for the chalet was declined. I stared at her, my exhausted mind slowly processing her bizarre words through the thick fog of intravenous pain medication. Why would she possibly care about a declined payment while standing over my critical care bed? Chloe reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a sleek black credit card, slamming it down on the power of attorney document. I instantly recognized my own company name, embossed in silver lettering. It was the card tied directly to my highest level corporate business account. You froze the account? Chloe hissed, slamming her hand on the tray table. I went to pay the final deposit on the ski lodge and the card was completely locked. You need to unfreeze it right now. The sheer audacity of her demand left me momentarily breathless. She had been secretly draining my corporate accounts to fund her lavish lifestyle, and she was standing in an intensive care unit demanding that I turn the money tap back on. How did you even get that? I rasped my throat, feeling like it was lined with shattered glass. Chloe scoffed, tossing her blonde hair. Please, Marcus gave it to me months ago. You are always so busy working your little data job staring at spreadsheets all day. You never even notice the charges. A few thousand for a designer bag, a few thousand for a getaway. You were practically begging us to use it with how clueless you are. She leaned over the bed railing, her eyes cold. We deserve that money, Maya. You come from absolutely nothing. You grew up in a cheap neighborhood and do not know how to appreciate the wealth you stumbled into. We have a certain standard of living to maintain, and you are just a glorified computer nerd playing pretend in our world. Did you think you could just freeze the accounts and we would walk away quietly? Chloe asked. That Aspen trip is non-refundable. My friends are already flying in. If I do not provide a valid card in the next hour, I will look like a fool in front of people who matter. So you are going to take that pen sign over the estate and unfreeze that corporate account before I lose my mind. Marcus nodded in agreement, stepping back up to the tray table to loom over me. Chloe is absolutely right, Maya. You are acting incredibly selfish right now. We are your family. You owe us this money. You have been holding out on us for years, hiding your true income, hoarding your assets, while I had to stress about our household expenses. The absolute hypocrisy of his statement was staggering. I had paid every single bill since the day we got married. I had funded his luxury cars, his custom suits, and apparently his sister-in-law's extravagant ski trips. You are going to sign the paper, Marcus threatened softly, leaning in close. Or I will make good on my promise. I will call the doctor in here right now and tell him to turn off the machines. You are not leaving this room until we get exactly what we want. The heavy click of the intensive care unit door unlatching echoed sharply behind Marcus, immediately shattering the suffocating, threatening tension he had just built. The thick slab of heavy wood swung open, revealing the imposing, perfectly postured figure of his mother, Beatrice. She marched into the sterile hospital room as if she were stepping onto a red carpet at a charity gala. Her spine was completely rigid, and her chin tilted upward in an expression of perpetual aristocratic disdain. She was dressed in an immaculate custom-tailored tweed suit, clutching a vintage crocodile leather handbag that likely cost more than my very first car. Her icy eyes swept critically over the blinking medical monitors, the clear plastic tubing tethering me to the bed, and finally settled on my bruised, violently swollen face. Instead of demonstrating any shock, horror, or basic maternal concern, her expression contorted into a mask of supreme, unfiltered annoyance. She wrinkled her nose dramatically delicately, waving a manicured hand in front of her face, as if the faint scent of antiseptic and rubbing alcohol deeply offended her refined sensibilities. She stepped up directly beside Chloe, placing a reassuring motherly hand on her daughter-in-law's shoulder before turning her predatory glare entirely onto me. Stop this pathetic, melodramatic display of defiance immediately. Maya Beatrice commanded, her voice ringing with the sharp, unquestionable authority she wielded ruthlessly over her entire family. Her tone was completely devoid of any warmth or human empathy. You are causing an unnecessary scene and embarrassing us all with this refusal. Look at the absolute state of you lying there gasping for air like a wounded animal. It is incredibly undignified and frankly hard to look at. We have all endured enough of your exhausting, dramatic antics for one day. Marcus has been more than generous by offering you a straightforward legal way out of this complicated mess. He drew up the necessary paperwork, he brought the pen, and he is giving you the golden opportunity to resolve this divorce quietly. All you have to do is sign the document and stop fighting the inevitable. You have always been so terribly stubborn, fighting against the natural order of things, refusing to accept your proper place. Chloe let out a loud, impatient huff, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. She needs to sign it right now, Beatrice. Chloe whined, tapping her foot. My elite travel agent is threatening to release my luxury chalet reservation to another client if the corporate card is not unfrozen by noon. I am absolutely not spending my winter vacation slumming it in a standard hotel room just because Maya wants to throw a childish temper tantrum. Beatrice shot Chloe a brief, silencing look before returning her full, intense attention to my hospital bed. She stepped closer, her expensive heels clicking sharply against the polished linoleum floor. She leaned over the metal bed railing aggressively, invading my limited personal space. The heavy scent of her signature rose perfume mixed sickeningly with the metallic smell of the medical equipment currently keeping me alive. Do you honestly believe you are the victim here? Beatrice asked, her perfectly painted lips curling into a cruel, mocking sneer. You brought this entire medical crisis upon yourself with your relentless, stressful behavior. We simply had to intervene to protect our family assets. You were becoming entirely too vocal, too demanding, and far too independent for a woman in your position. We needed you docile, we needed you obedient. I stared up at her in silent horror. My heart monitor spiked slightly as the terrifying truth began to spill freely from her mouth. Beatrice stood tall, completely unashamed of the monstrous crime she was actively confessing to, in a room filled with life support machines. Marcus did not act alone today, she declared proudly, placing a supportive hand on her son's broad shoulder. I am the one who reached out to my private, highly discreet physician. I am the one who secured the prescription. We knew you were planning to cause a massive scene in front of the judge during the asset allocation hearing this morning. We needed a reliable way to keep you quiet, to keep your mind foggy, confused, and compliant, while Marcus pushed the final settlement through the court. The anxiety medication was entirely my idea. Beatrice continued, a sickeningly smug smile spreading across her face. My physician uses it to calm his most erratic, unmanageable patients. It is a brilliant chemical compound for silencing hysterical women. I paid him a substantial, untraceable cash sum to provide the highest concentrated dose available. I personally handed those lithium capsules to Marcus over breakfast this morning and explicitly told him to dissolve them directly into your iced coffee. It was supposed to be a simple, heavy dose of pharmaceutical restraint to ensure a smooth, uncontested courtroom victory. The monitor beside my bed chimed a rapid warning as my pulse skyrocketed. It was a cold, calculated, premeditated poisoning orchestrated by the matriarch of the family. Beatrice rolled her eyes at the beeping machine, clearly irritated by the mechanical noise. Oh, please stop overreacting, she snapped impatiently. How were we supposed to know you had some bizarre, dramatic allergy to lithium compounds? My doctor assured me it would merely act as a strong sedative to manage your hysteria. If you had just behaved like a normal, rational, submissive wife during the divorce proceedings, we would never have had to resort to chemically managing your moods. Your body tearing itself apart right now is just another glaring example of your inherent biological inferiority. You always have to make everything so incredibly difficult for us. She reached out and tapped her manicured fingernail harshly against the plastic tray table, pressing heavily into my chest. You should be down on your knees thanking us, Maya. You should be weeping with absolute gratitude. that a high-class legacy family like ours ever allowed you to step foot through our front doors. You were nothing before you met Marcus. You were a nobody with a worthless data entry job and absolutely zero social standing. We took a stray out of the rain and gave it a diamond collar. We elevated you. We gave you a beautiful home, access to exclusive social circles, and a surname that actually commands respect in this city. We clothed you, we fed you, and we tolerated your mediocre background for years. Beatrice leaned in even closer, her eyes flashing with pure, unadulterated malice. We tried our very best to mold you into an acceptable society wife, but a stray is always a stray. You lacked the pedigree, the breeding, and the inherent grace required to carry our family name. You insisted on clinging to your petty independence. And instead of showing a single shred of gratitude for the beautiful life we generously provided, you hoarded your money. You built secret corporate accounts and hid your little business successes from the husband who rescued you from obscurity. You thought you could outsmart us, but you forgot exactly who you were dealing with. We are not some common street thugs. We are visionaries who take exactly what is rightfully ours. That money belongs to this family as fair compensation for enduring your tedious presence. Now pick up that pen and sign the power of attorney before my patience completely evaporates. The harsh fluorescent lights seemed to dim as the weight of their combined cruelty pressed down on my chest. I let my heavy eyelids flutter shut, forcing a single tear to trace a hot path down my cheek. My heart monitor slowed its frantic rhythm, mimicking the physical surrender of a broken woman. I let out a ragged, defeated sigh, allowing my stiff shoulders to slump against the mattress. I had played the obedient, docile wife for 5 miserable years, and falling back into that submissive posture was effortless. I slowly opened my eyes, ensuring they looked dull, vacant, and thoroughly crushed. "You win," I whispered, my voice a pathetic croak that barely carried over the steady hum of the oxygen concentrator. "I cannot fight you anymore. Just take it all and leave me alone." A collective wave of vicious satisfaction washed over the 3 predators surrounding my bed. Beatrice let out a triumphant hum, smoothing the invisible wrinkles from her tweed skirt. Chloe rolled her eyes, complaining about how long it took me to figure out my actual place in the hierarchy, frantically tapping her phone to text her elite travel agent. Marcus did not bother to hide his massive predatory grin. He shoved the stack of legal documents closer to my chest, his silver fountain pen vibrating in his eager grip. I lifted my right hand. It shook violently, a combination of the residual heavy metal toxins ravaging my nervous system and the deliberate performance I was putting on. My fingers fumbled uselessly against the smooth silver barrel of the pen before managing a weak grip. I let the nib hover over the thick black signature line on the first page. Marcus leaned in so close I could see the greedy dilation of his pupils. He pointed to the bottom corner, tapping the paper impatiently. I pressed the ink to the page. I did not sign my legal married name. I did not even sign my maiden name in the standard cursive my husband recognized. Instead, I carefully executed a highly specific classified Department of Defense duress code. It was an alphanumeric sequence, disguised within a sprawling signature, ending with a deliberate backward slash. Harrison Pierce and I had established that exact protocol during a high-stakes extraction in Kabul 7 years ago. It was legally binding, perfectly legitimate, and instantly flagged any resulting document as being signed under imminent threat of severe harm. I flipped through these heavy pages, my hand trembling as I replicated the duress code on every single required line. My breathing remained shallow and ragged, selling the illusion of absolute helpless submission. With the final slash of the pen, I let my hand drop lifelessly back onto the thin hospital blanket. The silver pen clattered loudly onto the plastic tray table. Marcus snatched the documents with the speed of a starving scavenger. He flipped rapidly through the thick packet, his greedy eyes scanning the bottom of each page to verify the ink. Once he saw the final mark, he let out a loud, booming laugh that bounced off the glass walls. He shoved the papers into his leather briefcase, snapping the heavy brass latches shut with a resounding click. "You really are a pathetic, stupid little data entry clerk," Marcus mocked, his voice dripping with pure, unchecked arrogance. Did you honestly believe you could hide the true value of your side project from me? I knew exactly what you were building in that home office while you thought I was out entertaining clients. My heart gave a genuine heavy thud. He was talking about the proprietary medical diagnostic software. It was an advanced predictive algorithmic program. I had spent the last 3 years coding from scratch, utilizing the raw data analysis skills I had honed during my military contracting days. It was designed to detect early markers of systemic organ failure before traditional blood panels could even register an anomaly. It was currently in the final stages of a massive acquisition deal with a major global health conglomerate. You thought you were so incredibly clever keeping the patent paperwork buried in a dummy corporation? Marcus gloated, pacing triumphantly at the foot of my bed. You thought you could stall the divorce proceedings just long enough for the corporate buyout to finalize keeping those millions entirely to yourself. But this beautiful, irrevocable power of attorney gives me total immediate control over that specific shell company and every single line of code you ever wrote. I own your software, Maya. I own your genius. And I'm going to sell it for an absolute fortune while you rot in a cheap apartment trying to figure out how to pay your grocery bills. Beatrice checked her diamond wristwatch, looking thoroughly bored by her son's gloating. We have what we came for, Marcus, she stated crisply, turning on her expensive heels. Let us leave this depressing facility immediately. The smell of sickness is ruining my appetite, and Chloe needs to finalize her chalet payments. Chloe was already out the door, her phone glued to her ear as she loudly demanded her travel agent reinstate her luxury booking. Marcus gave me one final condescending smirk. He patted my restrained foot through the blanket, a gesture of supreme mocking dominance. Have a wonderful recovery, darling, he sneered. Try not to choke on the hospital food. He spun around, his expensive leather shoes squeaking against the linoleum, and followed his mother out of the room. The heavy door swung shut behind them, the magnetic lock engaging with a solid, definitive thud. The sudden silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the steady rhythmic beeping of my heart monitor. I lay completely still for 10 seconds, ensuring their footsteps had faded entirely down the corridor. The door of the adjoining bathroom clicked open. Harrison Pierce stepped out of the shadows, his eyes burning with a cold, terrifying fury. He walked to my bed and handed me a secured laptop. I took the heavy matte black machine from Harrison, the cool metal grounding me instantly. The biometric scanner flashed a familiar green line across the screen as I pressed my thumb against the optical reader. A complex sequence of encrypted military firewalls melted away, revealing the secure command terminal of my life's work. I reached up with my free hand and yanked the suffocating plastic oxygen mask off my face, taking a deep, unfiltered breath of the sterile hospital air. We need to move right now. I rasped, my vocal cords still protesting the abuse of the lithium toxicity. Get me the discharge papers immediately. I am leaving. Harrison did not argue, nor did he offer the typical physician warnings about rest and recovery. He simply reached into his pristine white coat, produced the against medical advice forms, and laid them gently across my blanket. He knew exactly what was at stake. Marcus thought he had just executed the perfect corporate theft, snatching my little side project out from under me. He was completely oblivious to the reality of the software he had just claimed ownership of. It was never a standard medical diagnostic tool meant for civilian hospitals. It was a highly classified, multi-million-dollar predictive health algorithm. I had spent the last 3 years building it exclusively for the Department of Defense. The program utilized real-time biometric telemetry to predict acute combat casualties, systemic organ failure, and biological weapon exposure hours before physical symptoms manifested in active-duty soldiers. It was proprietary military technology, and my arrogant soon-to-be ex-husband was currently marching toward a federal building to sell stolen government property back to the exact agency that commissioned it. I need exactly 10 minutes before we walk out of here, I told Harrison, my fingers already flying across the illuminated keyboard. The residual tremors in my hands vanished, replaced by the muscle memory of writing thousands of lines of complex code. Marcus scheduled an emergency acquisition meeting for 2 o'clock this afternoon. He thinks he can walk into the Pentagon regional office, slap that forged power of attorney on the conference table, and walk out with a lucrative federal contract. I routed my connection through a secure proxy server, bypassing the hospital network entirely to access the dummy corporation where Marcus thought the software was housed. Harrison moved efficiently around my bed, silencing the loud warning alarms as he expertly detached the intravenous lines from my bruised arms. "I will monitor your vitals remotely," Harrison stated, his voice a low, steady rumble of absolute authority. "Your kidney function is stabilizing, but your central nervous system took a massive hit. If your heart rate spikes into the danger zone, I am calling a medical transport team, regardless of your personal vendetta." I nodded sharply, my eyes locked on the scrolling lines of data reflecting in the dark screen. Marcus had already initiated a remote transfer protocol. He was attempting to migrate the core architectural framework of my algorithm onto his personal server. He genuinely believed that the heavily fortified code protecting the military assets was just a standard commercial firewall. A dark, deeply satisfying smile touched the corners of my mouth as I watched his clumsy digital footprints track across my secure network. He was using Chloe's frozen corporate card credentials as a backdoor entry point, completely unaware that I had specifically designed that financial account as a digital tripwire. I executed a rapid override command, locking the genuine algorithm behind a heavily encrypted multi-tiered security vault. Then I carefully packaged a decoy file. It looked identical to the core predictive software, boasting the same file size and complex directory structure. In reality, it was a dormant tracking beacon paired with a catastrophic data wiping sequence. The moment Marcus opened that file in a secure federal facility, it would instantly trigger an aggressive security breach protocol, alerting the Department of Defense Cyber Command that an unauthorized civilian was attempting to distribute classified military assets. "He thinks he is about to become a millionaire," I murmured, hitting the final execution key with a decisive sharp tap. "He is actually walking straight into a federal espionage trap." Harrison handed me a folded stack of clothes he had clearly retrieved from my secure locker at the base. "You have 5 minutes to get dressed," he instructed calmly, turning his back to give me privacy. "My secure vehicle is idling in the underground loading dock. We will bypass the main lobby entirely." I slid out of the hospital bed, my legs trembling as my bare feet hit the cold linoleum floor. A wave of dizziness threatened to pull me under, but adrenaline kept me standing upright. I stripped off the hospital gown and pulled on the dark tactical trousers and sweater Harrison had provided. Every movement sent a sharp ache through my battered muscles, a reminder of the poison Beatrice had so casually ordered Marcus to feed me. They had tried to break me, to strip away my dignity, my assets, and my very life, all to maintain their illusion of superiority. I shoved my feet into my boots, lacing them up with a fierce, unwavering determination. I grabbed the encrypted laptop and tucked it securely under my arm. "I am ready," I announced, my voice finally finding its strength. Harrison opened the heavy ICU door, checking the long, brightly lit corridor before motioning me forward. We moved silently through the sterile hospital hallways, avoiding the busy nurse stations and slipping into a restricted service elevator. As the metal doors slid shut, cutting off the sights and sounds of the medical facility, I checked my secured watch. It was exactly 1 p.m. Marcus had 1 hour left to enjoy his delusional victory. He had demanded my signature, and he got exactly what he asked for. Now he was about to face the terrifying consequences of stealing from a woman who knew how to fight back. The panoramic view from the 42nd floor of the Vanguard Technology headquarters offered a sweeping, uninterrupted vista of the downtown skyline. Inside the executive boardroom, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive cologne, freshly brewed espresso, and unchecked hubris. The room itself was a monument to corporate excess, featuring floor-to-ceiling glass walls, a massive table carved from a single slab of polished black walnut, and plush leather chairs that swallowed their occupants in comfort. Marcus stood at the head of the table, his posture radiating the supreme confidence of a man who believed he had just conquered the world. His custom Italian suit fit flawlessly, catching the afternoon sunlight, as he paced back and forth before the enormous interactive smartboard dominating the front wall. Seated around the expansive table were three high-ranking officials from the Department of Defense. They wore impeccably pressed uniforms decorated with rows of colorful service ribbons, their expressions carved from pure stone. General Thomas Vance, a man with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed absolutely nothing, sat in the center. He watched Marcus with a calculated, unblinking intensity. Marcus offered his most charismatic, perfectly practiced smile, completely unfazed by the intimidating military presence in his boardroom. He picked up a sleek laser pointer, gesturing toward the complex rotating holographic display of a human circulatory system glowing on the screen behind him. Gentlemen, what you are looking at is the culmination of 3 years of my own relentless, sleepless dedication. Marcus lied smoothly, his voice echoing with polished authority. I conceptualized this predictive algorithmic framework to fundamentally revolutionize battlefield triage. My software does not merely react to trauma. It anticipates biological failure. By analyzing microfluctuations in heart rate variability, core temperature, and neurological responses, my program can predict a catastrophic systemic collapse up to 6 hours before the soldier even realizes they are in danger. I built this architecture from the ground up to save American lives. He paused, letting the stolen gravity of those words hang heavily in the air. He moved with the fluid grace of a seasoned salesman selling a product he fundamentally did not understand. He tossed out complex medical jargon and encrypted software terminology he had memorized from my personal project notes, weaving a masterful illusion of technical genius. He genuinely believed that speaking with enough unwarranted conviction would magically bridge the massive canyon of his own staggering ignorance. He was completely oblivious to the fact that the highly sophisticated military minds sitting across from him were analyzing his every word, searching for the authentic intellectual depth that simply did not exist. Beatrice sat perfectly upright near the corner window, her posture rigidly aristocratic. She held a crystal glass of sparkling water, taking delicate sips while beaming with maternal pride. Her icy blue eyes tracked her son's movements with deep satisfaction. In her mind, the ugly, unpleasant business at the hospital was already ancient history, a minor logistical hurdle swiftly overcome by superior breeding and ruthlessness. She had orchestrated the pharmaceutical restraint, secured the signature, and protected the family legacy. Watching Marcus command the attention of decorated military generals validated every dark, unforgivable action she had taken that morning. The stray had been discarded, and the thoroughbred was claiming his rightful prize. Directly across from Beatrice, slouching carelessly in her expensive leather chair, was Chloe. While the generals scrutinized the rotating holographic data models, Chloe was intensely focused on the glowing screen of her customized tablet. She had absolutely no interest in predictive health algorithms or military triage protocols. Her mind was entirely consumed by the impending $80 million federal contract Marcus had promised was a guaranteed certainty. She rapidly swiped through a highly exclusive invitation-only luxury retail portal. With a few taps of her manicured fingers, Chloe added a rare Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag to her virtual cart. The price tag rivaled a suburban mortgage, but she barely registered the number. She switched tabs, pulling up the communication thread with her elite travel concierge. She typed out a demanding, entirely unapologetic message confirming the upgraded luxury chalet in the Swiss Alps, requesting private helicopter transport from the airport, and demanding a personal chef be on standby 24 hours a day. She hit send, a smug, self-satisfied smile stretching across her face. The money was basically already sitting in their accounts. The grueling era of putting up with my tedious, unrefined presence was finally replaced by a permanent vacation of unlimited wealth. She was already mentally spending her cut of the federal payout, completely blind to the catastrophic digital trap waiting inside the secure network. General Vance leaned forward, resting his forearms heavily on the polished walnut table. "The presentation is undeniably impressive, Mr. Preston." Vance stated, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that commanded instant respect. "However, predictive modeling of this magnitude requires an incredibly complex neural network. The Department of Defense needs absolute assurance regarding the stability of the core code. If we integrate your software into our active combat wearable technology, we must know that the encryption protocols can withstand hostile foreign cyber attacks. Can you walk us through the specific machine learning layers you implemented to secure the biometric data streams? Marcus did not miss a beat. His smile widened completely, masking the fact that he had no idea what a machine learning layer actually entailed. He relied entirely on his natural ability to pivot and deflect. General. The proprietary encryption methods I developed are specifically designed to be adaptive, Marcus answered smoothly, pressing his hands flat against the table and leaning in to project earnest dedication. I anticipated the exact cyber warfare threats you are referencing. While I cannot disclose the granular mechanics of the code before the final contract is signed, I assure you the architecture is utterly impenetrable. It is a closed-loop, self-repairing system. Vance exchanged a brief, unreadable glance with the two colonels sitting beside him. He gave a single curt nod. Very well. Let us move to the practical demonstration. The acquisition board is prepared to authorize the immediate transfer of the $80 million allocation pending a successful integration test with our secure terminal. Marcus practically vibrated with excitement. The astronomical sum of money hung in the air close enough to taste. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and produced a heavy silver flash drive. He walked toward the secure military command terminal. His hand hovered inches from the terminal when the frosted glass doors violently burst inward, shattering the silence. The explosive crash made General Vance flinch, pushing his chair back from the table. I stood in the doorway, discarding the frail persona I maintained earlier. My tailored midnight blue pantsuit cut a striking silhouette against the corridor. The lithium tremors were gone, replaced by the steady precision of a woman reclaiming autonomy. Harrison Pierce flanked my right in a dark tactical jacket. Two men in black suits flanked my left, radiating federal authority. Marcus froze, the drive dangling between his trembling fingers. His smug grin melted, replaced by a mask of sheer terror. The blood drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin sickly and gray. He blinked rapidly, his mind rejecting the reality before him. "You were supposed to be restrained." He choked out, his facade crumbling. He stumbled backward, distancing himself from the terminal. "Security," he bellowed, waving frantically. "Get building security up here immediately. This woman is my estranged wife. She is mentally unstable and experiencing a dangerous psychotic break. She belongs in a psychiatric ward, not a federal briefing." General Vance did not signal for security. He folded his hands, his sharp eyes darting between my stance and Marcus's frantic meltdown. Chloe shrieked, dropping her tablet onto the table with a clatter. The screen shattered, terminating her $80 million shopping spree. She scrambled out of her leather chair, pressing her back against the far wall. Beatrice reacted with the vicious aggression of a cornered predator protecting her kill. She lunged across the carpet, her expensive heels digging into the fabric. "You ungrateful little stray," she hissed, her aristocratic composure completely evaporating. She threw herself into my path, raising her hands to shove me into the hallway. "You will not ruin this family. You will not take what is rightfully ours. Get out of this building before I have you committed for life." I did not even break my stride. I stepped to the side, allowing her momentum to carry her forward off balance. Before she could recover, one federal agent stepped neatly between us. He caught her wrists with effortless restraint, firmly guiding the matriarch toward the table. "Ma'am, I suggest you remain seated and keep your hands to yourself," the agent stated, projecting federal authority. Beatrice gasped, yanking her wrists free, her chest heaving with rage. "Do you know who you are touching?" She spat, eyes wild with fury. "We are the Prestons. We own this entire facility. You have no jurisdiction here." I stepped past her, leaving her rage behind, and walked toward the head table. I ignored Marcus entirely, treating him like a minor stain on the floor. I locked eyes with General Vance, offering a crisp nod. "General Vance, I am Maya Preston, the sole architect, lead developer, and patent holder of the algorithm you are evaluating. I apologize for the interruption, but it was absolutely necessary to prevent a catastrophic breach of Department of Defense infrastructure." Vance raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. Miss Preston, your husband just presented a compelling, highly technical overview of a system he claims to have built from scratch. He also presented a legally binding power of attorney transferring all software rights into his portfolio. That power of attorney was signed under extreme medical duress. Harrison Pierce interjected, stepping beside me. He placed a thick medical file onto the table, sliding it toward the generals. I am Dr. Harrison Pierce, former military surgeon and Maya's primary physician. The documents within that folder prove Marcus and Beatrice Preston illegally procured and administered a highly toxic concentrated dose of lithium to my patient this morning. The objective was to chemically restrain her and force her signature on those transfer documents. The colonels immediately reached for the medical file, their expressions hardening as they scanned the toxicology reports and time-stamped logs. General Vance shifted his gaze back to Marcus, the temperature in the room dropping to absolute zero. Is this true, Mr. Preston? Are you attempting to sell the military a stolen algorithm while actively poisoning the creator? Marcus backed up until his shoulders hit the smartboard, his expensive suit looking 3 sizes too big for his frame. He was lying, he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. She is a data entry clerk. She does not know how to write basic Python code. I built this software. I am the genius here. Look at the drive. The code is right there. It proves everything. He frantically held up the silver drive, thrusting it toward the general like a holy relic. I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. By all means, General, I invite you to plug that drive into your secure terminal, I offered, crossing my arms. But before you do, you should know exactly what my husband stole from my encrypted server an hour ago. He bypassed my civilian firewalls using his sister-in-law's frozen credit card. He thought he was downloading the core machine learning network. In reality, he downloaded a highly aggressive self-replicating decoy. The color drained from Chloe's face as the mention of her credit card echoed through the room. What does the decoy do? Miss Preston, General Vance asked, his voice deadly quiet. If he plugs that silver drive into your network, it will instantly trigger a catastrophic data wipe of this building's server farm, I explained, my voice echoing off the glass walls. Simultaneously, it will broadcast a silent alert directly to Cyber Command, flagging this location for harboring stolen classified military technology. He did not bring you a predictive health algorithm, General. He brought you a digital grenade, and he is begging you to pull the pin. Marcus stared at the silver drive in his hand, as if it had turned into a live venomous snake. He dropped it. The heavy metal casing hit the floor with a pathetic clatter that sealed his absolute ruin. The clatter of the flash drive against the floor echoed like a gunshot. It rolled before stopping against General Vance's shoe. For 10 agonizing seconds, no one moved. The air grew thick and still. Marcus stared at the drive, his chest heaving rapidly as his brain processed the catastrophic implications. Beatrice stood frozen, her manicured hands hovering uselessly, her painted lips parted in a silent gasp. The arrogant sneer had been wiped from her face, replaced by a mask of panic. Chloe remained pressed flat against the far glass wall, finally realizing her luxurious Swiss vacation was dissolving into a federal nightmare. Vance did not look down at the drive. He did not signal the agents to arrest my husband, nor did he acknowledge Beatrice's sputtering attempts to regain control. Instead, the imposing military commander calmly pushed his chair back from the table. He stood up, adjusting his uniform jacket with precise movements. Beside him, the 2 decorated colonels mirrored his actions, rising from their seats in perfect synchronization. The 3 military officials turned their backs on Marcus completely. They faced me, squared their shoulders, brought their shoes together with a sharp click, and raised their right hands in a flawless simultaneous salute. It is an honor to see you on your feet, Director General Vance stated, his voice ringing with absolute respect. Cyber Command notified us that your extraction from the civilian medical facility was successful. We secured the perimeter of this building the moment your signal went live. I returned the salute with practiced precision, the familiar military protocol settling over me like a second skin. Thank you, General, I replied, my voice steady and commanding, devoid of the weak submissive tone I had used in the hospital just 1 hour ago. The secure extraction was executed flawlessly by Dr. Pierce. The objective is now fully contained within this room. Marcus, choking on his own breath, shattered the military formality. He stumbled backward, his knees hitting the edge of a leather chair. Director. He croaked, his voice cracking violently as his eyes darted between my tactical uniform and the saluting generals. What exactly are you doing? Why are you saluting her? She is a data entry clerk. She organizes spreadsheets. This is a massive mistake. You are talking to my wife. General Vance slowly lowered his hand, his steel-gray eyes locking onto Marcus with pure disgust. I am addressing Director Maya Pierce of the Department of Defense Advanced Algorithmic Warfare Division. Vance corrected, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. She is not your subordinate, Mr. Preston. She is one of the highest-ranking civilian intelligence operatives active in the military. And as of this exact moment, she is the primary federal agent overseeing your total downfall. Beatrice let out a high, thin wail, finally comprehending the sheer magnitude of their miscalculation. The aristocratic facade she had weaponized for decades cracked into a million pieces. She looked at me not as a stray to be managed, but as the apex predator who had just locked the cage. You lied to us, she whispered, her voice shaking with terror. You lived in my house for 5 years and you lied about everything. I did not lie, Beatrice, I stated, stepping closer to the table. You simply never bothered to look past your own blinding arrogance. You assumed my silence was submission. You assumed my long hours in the home office were spent doing tedious clerical work because your elitist worldview could not possibly comprehend that a woman without a legacy surname might actually be building classified federal defense architecture. You only saw a stray. The military saw a visionary. I let you believe what you wanted to believe because it provided the perfect cover for my assignment. Marcus grabbed the edge of the boardroom table, his knuckles turning white as he desperately tried to anchor himself to reality. He looked wildly at the colonels, his panic escalating into uncontrollable hysteria. You came here to buy my software, he pleaded, his voice spiraling into a frantic whine. We had a legally scheduled acquisition meeting. We discussed an $80 million contract. I have the emails. I have the calendar invites. We were never here to buy anything from you, Mr. Preston. General Vance replied, his tone devoid of any sympathy. The Department of Defense does not purchase stolen property, especially when that property belongs to us in the first place. This entire acquisition meeting was nothing but a highly coordinated sting operation. The general stepped around the table, closing the distance between himself and my hyperventilating husband. The moment you utilized that forged power of attorney to bypass Director Pierce's primary firewall this morning, you triggered a massive alert at Cyber Command. We knew you were attempting to extract classified assets. We allowed you to schedule this meeting. We sat here and listened to your pathetic, plagiarized presentation because we needed to catch you actively attempting to sell stolen military technology to federal agents. You just committed corporate espionage, wire fraud, and treason in a room full of witnesses. Marcus's face contorted into a mask of desperate, cornered rage. His eyes darted toward the server room, visible through the frosted glass across the hall. No, he yelled, spittle flying from his lips. You cannot take my company. I still own this facility. I own the physical servers. If I am going down, I am taking that algorithm with me. I will wipe the entire mainframe right now. He lunged toward the heavy glass doors, his hand reaching for the emergency network override panel mounted on the wall. I did not move to intercept him. I did not signal the federal agents to stop him. I simply reached into the tactical pocket of my dark jacket and pulled out a small black remote control. You do not own anything anymore, Marcus, I said, my thumb hovering over the single red button on the device. I pressed it down hard. The smart board behind Marcus instantly glitched, its sleek holographic graphics warping into a jagged mess of digitized static. A deafening siren erupted from the overhead speakers as emergency strobe lights bathed the boardroom in a harsh crimson glow. The primary server farm across the hall plunged into total darkness, the vital hum of its massive cooling fans dying a sudden death. Marcus whipped his head around, watching his $80 million illusion disintegrate into nothingness. He scrambled toward the control console, his hands slapping uselessly against the unresponsive keyboard, desperately trying to abort the sequence. The decoy file had done its job flawlessly, executing a complete and irreversible wipe of the localized network architecture. Every shred of stolen code, every falsified pitch deck, and every scrap of proprietary data Marcus thought he possessed simply ceased to exist in the digital realm. I stood perfectly still near the entrance, calmly letting him exhaust himself in a futile frenzy of keystrokes. He was a captain frantically bailing water on a ship that had already sunk. Stepping forward with calm and highly deliberate purpose, I bypassed his wildly flailing hands and connected a small, secure titanium drive to the master terminal. The blaring alarms abruptly cut off, replaced by the low, steady hum of my isolated encrypted override sequence, taking total command of the room. The smartboard flickered back to life, but this time it did not display Marcus's fabricated medical models. Instead, high-definition scans of federal legal documents illuminated the space. I tapped the screen, magnifying the official United States patent registration for the predictive health algorithm. The bold black ink at the top of the page clearly designated the sole proprietor of the intellectual property. It was not Vanguard Technology, nor was it registered under my married name. The patent belonged entirely to a heavily fortified shell corporation named after my late grandfather, registered exclusively under my maiden name. I had incorporated the holding company 3 years ago, establishing an ironclad legal firewall long before Marcus ever considered stealing my life's work. "That document means absolutely nothing," Marcus shouted, his voice cracking wildly as he pointed a trembling finger at the glowing screen. He turned to General Vance, his chest heaving with desperate, ragged breaths. "We are legally married. Any asset she created during our union is classified as marital property. Vanguard Technology maintains full corporate jurisdiction over her intellectual output. Furthermore, I possess a binding power of attorney executed this very morning. It explicitly grants me comprehensive, irrevocable control over her entire digital portfolio." He patted his jacket pockets frantically, finally producing a crumpled copy of the legal document Beatrice had forced upon me in the intensive care unit. He slammed the paper onto the polished walnut table, smoothing out the deep creases with sweaty, shaking palms. She signed over all rights in front of medical staff. "The patent transfer is legally pending, but the authorization is solid. She cannot unilaterally revoke it now." I did not look at the crumpled paper on the table. With a swift, confident swipe of my hand across the smartboard, the patent document minimized, replaced instantly by a split-screen display. On the left side, a high-resolution image of the power of attorney appeared, zooming in on my jagged, barely legible signature scrawled at the bottom. On the right side, I projected a time-stamped medical chart directly from Dr. Pierce's encrypted hospital database. I highlighted a specific toxicology report detailing the exact chemical composition of my blood at the precise moment that signature was obtained. "Let us examine the legal validity of your authorization, Marcus." I stated, my voice echoing with cold precision. "A contract is only binding if the signatory is of sound mind and acting entirely without coercion. As this toxicology report clearly proves to a federal standard, my bloodstream contained a lethal concentration of unauthorized lithium." I tapped the interactive screen again, pulling up the security footage from my hospital room, captured by the discreet surveillance camera positioned directly above my bed. The silent video played in high definition, showing Beatrice physically pinning my weakened arm, while Marcus shoved the heavy clipboard onto my chest. I was actively experiencing a medically induced systemic crash on that tape. My core body temperature was spiking into dangerous territory, my heart rate was wildly erratic, and my neurological functions were severely impaired by the chemical restraint your mother callously orchestrated. In the strict eyes of the law and the federal government, A signature extorted from a helpless patient experiencing acute lithium toxicity is not just legally void. It is physical assault, severe medical malpractice, and textbook criminal extortion. You did not secure a legal transfer of multi-million-dollar assets today. You meticulously documented your own undeniable felony. General Vance leaned forward, his steely gaze locked onto the violent video playing on the smartboard. The silence in the corporate boardroom was absolute, broken only by the soft, rhythmic hum of the digital projector. He turned his head slowly, looking at Marcus with a mixture of profound disgust and cold, calculating realization. You brought the Department of Defense into a secure boardroom to witness a fraudulent pitch based on a violently extorted asset. Vance stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded the room. You brazenly attempted to defraud the United States military to the tune of $80 million. Beatrice swayed dangerously on her tired feet, the color completely drained from her pale, aging face. She reached out blindly, gripping the back of a leather chair to keep from collapsing, as the bleak reality of her impending federal imprisonment set in. Chloe finally realized the devastating magnitude of the situation, dropping her shattered tablet onto the plush corporate carpet. Marcus simply stared at the massive screen, completely paralyzed, trapped forever in the cold, inescapable prison of his own monumental hubris. The algorithm was now safe, my name was cleared, and the trap had definitively snapped shut. The ratcheting of cuffs locking around Chloe's wrists snapped Marcus out of his paralytic shock. He watched two agents secure his sister, her hands pinned behind her back as she sobbed. The reality of the charges hung heavy in the boardroom air, obliterating any shred of the Preston family's dignity. Marcus stumbled backward, his leather shoes scraping against the floor. He distanced himself from Chloe and his mother, raising both hands in a gesture of surrender. His hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat, his facade dissolving into cowardice. He looked at General Vance, desperation making his chest heave as his mind scrambled for a scapegoat to absorb the fallout. I had no knowledge of her activities. Marcus pleaded, his voice climbing an octave as he pointed an accusing finger at his sister. She handled her own accounts. I am the chief officer of Vanguard Technology. I only oversee the vision, not transactions. He then pivoted, aiming his betrayal at the woman who had orchestrated his existence. Beatrice gasped, her eyes widening in horror as her son turned his crosshairs on her. My mother managed all the directives, Marcus stammered, stepping closer to the military officials in a display of submission. She was the one who liaised with the staff regarding Maya's care. If there was any coercion regarding that signature, it was her doing. I was trusting my mother's judgment during a crisis. I am a victim of their manipulation just as much as anyone else in this room. Beatrice let out a choke. The aristocratic mask she had weaponized for decades shattered, exposing the woman beneath. Her own flesh and blood, the son she had protected and elevated above all others, was offering her to federal agents to save his own skin. You pathetic coward, she hissed, her voice shaking with a mixture of grief and venom. I did everything for you. Everything I orchestrated was to secure your future. Marcus ignored her completely, keeping his gaze locked on the figures of the Department of Defense officials. He believed his performance was working, hoping the military men would see him as a duped businessman rather than a conspirator. I allowed his monologue to echo against the walls before taking a slow step toward the master terminal. You possess a talent for shifting the blame, Marcus, I stated, my voice slicing cleanly through his babbling. But federal investigations require empirical evidence, not finger-pointing and empty deflections. I tapped a sequence of keys on the console, engaging a small hidden partition on my drive. The smartboard flickered, dismissing the medical charts and legal documents. In their place, a high-definition video feed filled the screen. The camera angle provided a wide view of the gourmet kitchen inside the house we shared. The timestamp in the bottom corner indicated the footage was recorded at exactly 6 a.m, 3 days before my hospital admission. Bright sunlight streamed through the bay windows, illuminating the pristine marble countertops. On the screen, Marcus and Beatrice stood huddled together near the expensive espresso machine. General Vance leaned forward, his steely eyes narrowing as he scrutinized the crystal-clear surveillance footage. You installed hidden cameras in your own primary residence. The general noted, his tone laced with grim professional respect. I recognized the behavioral patterns of an escalating threat long before they executed their final play, I replied smoothly. A defensive operative never leaves their home perimeter unmonitored. On the massive display, the digital version of Marcus reached into his tailored suit jacket and produced a small, unmarked amber prescription bottle. He handed it directly to his mother. Beatrice took the bottle, unscrewed the child-proof cap, and emptied a handful of chalky white pills into a heavy granite mortar. The boardroom fell dead silent as the crisp, enhanced audio track began to play loudly through the overhead speakers. The harsh grinding sound of the pestle crushing the heavy medication into a fine powder echoed ominously. Beatrice carefully scooped the pulverized dust and dumped it directly into my personal coffee grinder, mixing it seamlessly with the dark roasted beans. The malicious intent was captured in undeniable, perfectly lit, high-definition, stunning clarity. The audio feed picked up their sinister conversation with terrifying precision. This dosage is significantly higher than yesterday, the digital Marcus whispered, watching his mother secure the heavy lid on the coffee grinder. Are you absolutely certain it will not trigger an immediate cardiac event before we successfully secure the patent transfer? Beatrice did not even flinch on the recording. She wiped a stray fleck of white powder from the marble counter. It is a highly calculated cumulative dose, she replied coldly. It will keep her completely docile, heavily disoriented, and utterly compliant. We just need her to firmly believe she is actively losing her mind from corporate stress. Once her cognitive functions degrade enough for the involuntary psychiatric hold, the power of attorney becomes instantly active. You get the corporate assets, and we finally get rid of the stray. The video concluded, leaving the final frame frozen on their conspiring faces. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with the undeniable proof of premeditated chemical assault. General Vance slowly stood up to his full height, his posture radiating absolute authority and profound disgust. He looked at Marcus as if examining a particularly repulsive insect. Attempting to defraud the federal government is a massive felony, the general stated, his voice, a low, dangerous rumble that seemed to heavily shake the floorboards. But systematically poisoning a cleared federal intelligence operative in order to steal classified military technology elevates your crimes to the severe level of domestic terrorism. Marcus collapsed into the nearest leather chair, his legs completely giving out beneath him. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly shade of gray. He buried his face in his hands, realizing there was no lie left to spin, no legal loophole left to exploit, and no family member left anymore. The crushing reality of her family's complete annihilation finally pierced through Chloe's thick bubble of materialism. She stared at her brother trembling in his chair, and her mother frozen in utter disgrace, but empathy was not in her nature. Basic survival instincts took over. She threw her custom tablet onto the conference table, the screen cracking against the polished wood, and shot up from her leather seat. Her face was flushed with indignant rage as she pointed a manicured finger directly at me. "This has absolutely nothing to do with me!" Chloe screamed, her voice echoing shrilly across the boardroom. "I am not a part of Vanguard technology. I never touched your ridiculous algorithm or whatever medical documents you are talking about. You cannot trap me in this insane federal nightmare. I am still a Preston, and I am still legally entitled to my portion of the family money. You are completely out of your mind if you think you can freeze my access to our personal offshore accounts. I am calling the police right now and having you arrested for criminal harassment." She snatched her diamond-encrusted smartphone from the table, her thumbs jabbing aggressively at the screen as she prepared to dial emergency services. She genuinely believed her inherited privilege would act as a magical shield against the devastating federal storm tearing through the room. I did not attempt to stop her from making the call. I simply smiled, a calm, genuinely amused expression that caused her frantic typing to falter. "You are more than welcome to contact local law enforcement." "Chloe," I stated, unzipping the side compartment of my tactical briefcase. In fact, having more officers present might expedite the massive amount of paperwork we are about to process. However, the federal agent standing right behind you currently holds superior jurisdiction over your specific crimes. Chloe scoffed loudly, crossing her arms over her chest. My crimes, she repeated, rolling her eyes with theatrical exasperation. I buy expensive shoes and book luxury vacations. Being rich and having incredibly high standards is not a federal offense, Maya. You are just a bitter, jealous stray who wants to punish us for having the kind of generational wealth you could never naturally attain. You have absolutely nothing on me. I pulled a massive, heavy stack of meticulously tabbed banking documents from my briefcase. The thick bind of papers hit the walnut table with a satisfying, authoritative thud. I did not hand the documents to Marcus or Beatrice. Instead, I slid the entire stack directly across the table to General Vance and the federal agents flanking him. You are entirely correct that purchasing luxury goods is not illegal, Chloe, I replied, stepping toward the smartboard. But the precise methodology you utilize to fund that outrageously extravagant lifestyle certainly is. 6 months ago, I noticed a series of highly sophisticated financial anomalies originating from a shadow account buried deep within Vanguard payroll systems. At first, I assumed Marcus was simply embezzling company funds to prop up his failing tech ventures. But Marcus is remarkably lazy when it comes to tedious administrative masking. This specific financial diversion was uniquely greedy, surprisingly consistent, and explicitly tied to international luxury vendors. I tapped the smartboard, projecting a staggering spreadsheet of itemized transactions. Every single purchase Chloe had made over the last 2 years illuminated the room in high definition. Designer handbags, exclusive Swiss ski chalets, first-class international flights, and rare imported jewelry scrolled endlessly across the massive screen. The federal agents began flipping through the physical documents I had provided, their expressions hardening with every page they reviewed. Chloe stared at the screen, her mouth dropping open as her entire secret financial history was laid bare in front of the Department of Defense. You committed felony identity theft and massive wire fraud, I stated, my voice ringing with absolute finality. You deliberately intercepted my secure corporate credentials and utilized my classified biometric clearances to secretly open 6 different phantom credit lines. You did not just steal from your brother's failing company. You actively impersonated a cleared federal defense operative to maliciously siphon exactly $250,000 into your personal accounts. You funneled stolen capital across international borders to purchase Himalayan crocodile handbags and private helicopter tours. Chloe's defiant posture instantly evaporated. The arrogant sneer melted off her face, replaced by raw, unadulterated panic. She looked wildly at the federal agents who were already pulling a separate set of steel handcuffs from their tactical belts. The reality of the situation crashed down upon her, and she immediately deployed her only remaining defense mechanism. The legendary Preston White tears began to flow. Her lower lip trembled violently as she forced a stream of perfectly timed tears to cascade down her cheeks. She let out a soft, helpless whimper, shrinking back against the conference table to appear as small and fragile as possible. She looked up at General Vance through her wet eyelashes, weaponizing her perceived innocence. I did not understand what I was doing, Chloe sobbed, her voice cracking with manufactured terror. I am just a girl. I do not know anything about corporate finance or biometric clearances. Marcus told me that account was a trust fund set up for my personal expenses. He lied to me. My mother told me it was safe to use those cards. They forced me to do it. You cannot send me to prison. I am too fragile for this. I have severe anxiety. Please, you have to believe me. I am a victim here. She reached out to place a delicate hand on the nearest federal agent's arm. It was a performance that had saved her from countless speeding tickets. The federal agents did not even blink. They possessed zero tolerance for theatrical manipulation. The closest agent smoothly sidestepped her reaching hand. He grabbed her wrist with expert precision and spun her around. The heavy steel handcuffs ratcheted around her wrists with a sharp click. The sharp click of the heavy steel handcuffs securing Chloe completely shattered the last fragile remnant of the artificial sanity Marcus possessed. He stood frozen by the ruined smartboard, his chest heaving as he watched his sister sobbing uncontrollably while being hauled away by federal agents. The sheer impossibility of the situation finally penetrated his thick skull. His highly illegal massive federal contract was vaporized. His mother was facing federal imprisonment for attempted murder. His sister was being arrested for felony wire fraud. Everything he had meticulously stolen and dishonestly built over the past 5 years was completely ruined. He slowly turned his head away from his weeping sister and locked his bloodshot eyes directly onto me. The charming corporate facade he used to manipulate investors peeled away, revealing the raw, unadulterated monster lurking underneath. He did not see a brilliant architect or a federal operative. He only saw the quiet woman he thought he owned, the obedient wife he believed was too meek to ever fight back. His mind simply could not process the fact that I was the apex predator who had orchestrated his total annihilation. A visceral, animalistic growl started deep within his tense vocal cords. "You ruined my entire life!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with a terrifying mixture of despair and uncontrollable fury. He completely abandoned any remaining sense of personal preservation. His expensive leather shoes slipped against the polished floor as he suddenly launched his entire body across the boardroom. He lunged directly toward me, his hands outstretched like claws, his face twisted into a mask of pure murderous intent. He wanted to physically destroy the person who had mathematically dismantled his stolen empire. He crossed the distance with surprising speed, fueled entirely by the frantic adrenaline of a cornered, desperate corporate coward. I did not even flinch or take a single step backward. Before Marcus could close the remaining gap, the room erupted into violent motion. Dr. Pierce, who had been standing silently near the glass partition, moved with sudden and devastating military precision. He stepped firmly into the direct path, dropping his shoulder and driving his weight forcefully into the chest of my husband. The impact sounded like a heavy sack of concrete hitting the floor. Marcus gasped violently as the air was quickly forced from his lungs. 3 federal agents instantly swarmed the falling man, taking him down without hesitation. They slammed Marcus hard against the plush corporate carpet, instantly neutralizing his pathetic attempt at physical violence. One massive agent pressed a heavy knee firmly between the shoulder blades of my attacker, pinning him flat against the floor. Another agent grabbed his flailing arms, wrenching them forcefully behind his back. Marcus thrashed and kicked like a spoiled child, throwing a violent tantrum, his expensive designer suit wrinkling and tearing under the brutal restraint. "Let me go!" he shrieked, spitting onto the carpet as he struggled uselessly against the overwhelming federal force holding him down. "You cannot do this to me." General Vance looked down at the pathetic display from the head of the conference table, his expression completely devoid of pity. "Read him his rights," the general commanded, his voice slicing cleanly through the frantic screaming. The agent, pressing his knee into the spine of Marcus, leaned down, his tone strictly professional and cold. "Marcus Preston, you are under arrest," the agent stated loudly. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney right now before any questioning happens here." The agent continued reciting the familiar warning, ensuring every single word echoed clearly across the silent boardroom. "You are being officially charged with multiple federal offenses." The agent continued, tightening his powerful grip on the wrists of my husband. "These charges include the attempted murder of a federal operative, severe domestic terrorism, massive corporate espionage, felony wire fraud, and deliberately attempting to defraud the United States government." The sheer magnitude of the listed felonies seemed to finally break the fighting spirit Marcus still possessed. His thrashing body suddenly went completely limp against the carpet as he realized it was over. I slowly stepped forward, my tactical boots making absolutely no sound on the floor. I stood directly above the man who had spent 5 years treating me like an invisible, mindless servant. I looked down at his flushed, wet, red face pressed painfully against the floorboards. His meticulously styled hair was a sweaty mess, and his arrogant pride was permanently shattered. He blinked up at me, his eyes wide, with a pathetic, desperate pleading that he had never once shown me during our miserable marriage. He opened his mouth to speak, but absolutely no sound managed to ever escape him. You spent years demanding perfection, while contributing absolutely nothing to the world. I said, my voice carrying a quiet, terrifying calm that commanded the entire room. You thought my silence was weakness, and you believed my patience was submission. You poisoned my coffee, forged my signature, and tried to sell my intellect to the highest bidder because you are fundamentally incapable of generating your own success. I tilted my head slightly, observing his complete physical and emotional ruin with total detachment. I guess you are the one pulling a dramatic performance now, I stated with absolute power and cold finality. The federal agents roughly hauled Marcus up from the floor, dragging his limp, defeated body toward the heavy glass doors. He did not fight back anymore. He hung his head in absolute disgrace as they marched him out of the boardroom, leading him toward a lifetime of federal incarceration. General Vance gave me a sharp, respectful salute before following his men out into the hallway. Dr. Pierce remained behind, offering a quiet, knowing smile. The room was finally empty of dangerous corporate parasites. I walked over to the terminal, retrieved my encrypted drive, and prepared for my real mission today. My drive clicked into my briefcase, sealing proof of my reclaimed life. Weeks dissolved into a blur of federal indictments and media scrutiny that obliterated the Preston legacy. Their prestigious name was now nothing more than a headline associated with corporate fraud. 30 days after watching my husband dragged out in federal handcuffs, I walked through the doors of the exact same court where this nightmare begun. The air conditioning hummed, but the oppressive weight of intimidation was gone. I wore a crimson suit, my posture radiating the certainty of a woman who orchestrated her own salvation. Seated at the defendant's table, looking unrecognizable, was Marcus. Italian suits had been replaced by an orange prison jumpsuit. Heavy steel shackles connected his wrists to his waist, restricting his movements to pathetic shuffles. His hair was unkempt, and the arrogant smirk had melted away. He looked hollow, reduced to a trembling shell, facing the catastrophic consequences of his boundless greed. Beside him, his defense attorney stared down at legal documents with a miserable expression, acutely aware that this hearing was not a negotiation, but an execution. Judge Harrison sat behind his wooden bench, his stern face illuminated by the glow of his monitor. This was the same judge who had looked at me with skepticism when Marcus falsely portrayed me as a mentally unstable wife prone to delusions. Now the judge was reviewing a mountain of federal evidence that completely exonerated me while burying his former golden boy. The silence was absolute as Judge Harrison methodically flipped through the financial audits, the toxicological reports detailing the chemical assault I endured, and the explicit confessions extorted from Beatrice and Chloe during their federal interrogations. Mr. Preston, Judge Harrison spoke, his voice ringing with a cold authority that made Marcus physically flinch. In my 25 years on the bench, I have presided over countless contentious divorces, financial disputes, and ugly betrayals. However, the sheer magnitude of malice, calculated fraud, and physical danger you inflicted upon your wife is unprecedented in this courtroom. You did not simply attempt to hide marital assets. You conspired to chemically incapacitate your spouse, steal her classified intellectual property, and defraud the federal government to fund a fraudulent lifestyle. Marcus opened his mouth, operating on a dying instinct to spin another lie, but his attorney swiftly placed a warning hand on his sleeve. The disgraced CEO swallowed hard and lowered his gaze to the wooden table, the heavy chains rattling slightly as he trembled. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting calmly on the table. My attorney, a ruthless corporate litigator I hired using the recovered funds from Chloe's shadow accounts, did not even need to speak. The federal convictions had done all the heavy lifting. The divorce proceedings were merely the final administrative nail in the coffin of the Preston family. Based on the overwhelming evidence provided by the federal prosecutors and the gross violations of the marital contract, I am granting a highly favorable dissolution of this marriage, Judge Harrison declared, picking up his wooden gavel. Furthermore, I am ordering the complete forfeiture of all remaining personal and corporate assets previously held by Marcus Preston. Every single offshore account, every hidden investment portfolio, and the entire primary estate are hereby legally transferred to Maya for full financial restitution. You are ordered to pay complete compensatory damages for the stolen algorithms, the medical trauma, and the severe emotional distress inflicted upon the plaintiff. You will leave this marriage with absolutely nothing. The gavel slammed down against the sounding block with a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot through the room. It was the sound of my absolute freedom. Marcus let out a pathetic, strangled sob, finally comprehending that his entire existence had been legally erased. He had no money, no company, no family mansion, and no future outside of a federal penitentiary. Judge Harrison set the gavel down and shifted his gaze directly toward me. The stern, intimidating lines of his face softened into an expression of profound professional regret. "Mrs. Preston," the judge said, his tone dropping the formal legal cadence to address me directly. "During our initial hearing, you stood in this room and tried to warn this court about the systemic abuse and financial manipulation you were suffering. I allowed the defendant's polished reputation and his mother's social standing to cloud my judgment. I dismissed your highly valid concerns as marital anxiety. I was wrong, and my skepticism placed you in further danger. For that, I offer you my most sincere, unqualified apologies. You have demonstrated extraordinary courage and brilliant tactical survival." I held the judge's gaze, acknowledging his unprecedented apology with a slow, dignified nod. "Thank you, Your Honor," I replied, my voice steady and clear. "It takes a significant amount of integrity to admit a misjudgment. I appreciate the court's swift action today in rectifying the situation." The bailiff stepped forward, grabbing Marcus by his shackled arms to haul him back to the federal transport van waiting outside. He dragged his feet, turning his head to look at me one final time as they pulled him toward the heavy side doors. I did not offer him a smile, a sneer, or even a glimmer of vindictive satisfaction. I simply looked right through him, treating him with the exact same cold indifference he had shown me for 5 years. He was no longer a threat. He was merely a resolved clerical error. I stood up, smoothing the pristine fabric of my suit. I gathered my briefcase, feeling the reassuring weight of my encrypted drive inside. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung open, revealing the bright, blinding sunlight of the afternoon. I walked out into the corridor, my heels clicking a steady, powerful rhythm against the marble floor. I was no longer a victim, a discarded wife, or a pawn in their corporate games. I was the sole architect of my own empire, stepping freely into a world that I finally owned. The warm Atlanta breeze caught my hair as I descended the granite steps of the federal courthouse. Every breath I took tasted distinctly different, completely devoid of the suffocating tension that had defined my miserable existence inside the sprawling Preston household. Pigeons scattered rapidly across the manicured concrete plaza, disturbed by the purposeful stride of the military personnel waiting patiently for me at the base of the stairs. General Thomas Vance stood rigidly near a pristine fleet of black, armored SUV vehicles, his imposing frame casting a long shadow over the sun-baked pavement. He was closely accompanied by 2 high-ranking defense attorneys and a silent military courier holding a heavy titanium briefcase. These powerful men were not waiting for the discarded wife of a disgraced tech CEO. They were actively waiting for the brilliant chief architect of the most advanced biometric predictive algorithm on the planet. I tightened my confident grip on the handle of my own briefcase, feeling the deeply satisfying contrast between my past engineered vulnerability and my current absolute authority. General Vance offered a sharp, respectful nod as I approached the designated secure perimeter established around the idling vehicles. His steely gray eyes, previously filled with deep skepticism during Marcus's fraudulent boardroom presentation, now held nothing but profound professional admiration and genuine respect. We bypassed the standard corporate pleasantries, moving directly to the reinforced hood of the central command vehicle, where the silent courier swiftly unlatched the heavy titanium case. Inside the secure container lay the finalized Department of Defense acquisition contract, a towering stack of heavily redacted legal documents bound in thick navy blue folders. This staggering $80 million federal agreement was the genuine culmination of my endless sleepless nights, my relentless coding, and my stolen intellectual property finally returned to its rightful creator. The general handed me a heavy, perfectly balanced gold fountain pen, its polished surface catching the bright afternoon sunlight. He pointed a scarred finger to the final signature line, officially bypassing the suffocating corporate red tape that Marcus had desperately tried to weave around my life's work. I leaned forward over the dark metal of the armored vehicle and pressed the sharp nib against the crisp paper. My signature flowed effortlessly, legally binding the United States military to my proprietary neural network and instantly transforming me into one of the most powerful women in the global health technology sector. The thick black ink dried in seconds, officially cementing a lucrative partnership that would fundamentally revolutionize battlefield medical triage and guarantee my permanent financial independence. General Vance carefully collected the signed classified documents, verifying each individual page before locking them securely back inside the impenetrable titanium vault. He extended his large calloused hand toward me, and I shook it with a firm, unwavering grip that conveyed my total confidence. The monumental transaction was fully complete, permanently severing the final invisible tether that tied my brilliant algorithm to the ruined, disgraced legacy of Vanguard technology. The heavily armed military convoy fired up their powerful engines simultaneously, the deep rumble vibrating intensely through the thick concrete plaza as they prepared to transport the most valuable medical code in the country to a secure subterranean server. I stood silently and watched the imposing armored vehicles pull away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the chaotic flow of downtown Atlanta traffic. The crushing, unbearable weight of the past 5 years completely vanished from my shoulders, replaced immediately by an intoxicating surge of limitless potential. I had survived a highly coordinated chemical assassination attempt, totally outsmarted a family of vicious corporate predators, and single-handedly dismantled a massive fraud scheme from the inside out. Standing alone on the bright sunlit plaza, I took a long moment to simply exist in the quiet, deeply satisfying aftermath of my hard-fought victory. A quiet, steady set of footsteps broke through my peaceful reverie. I slowly turned my head to see Dr. Pierce walking purposefully toward me from the direction of a nearby luxury cafe. He wore a sharp, immaculately tailored charcoal suit instead of his usual clinical white medical coat, moving with a relaxed, confident grace that I had never seen within the highly sterile, strictly monitored confines of the hospital psychiatric ward. His calm presence was a deeply comforting, incredibly solid reminder of the crucial life-saving alliance we had secretly forged in the darkest, most terrifying hours of my heavily drugged captivity. He did not offer any dramatic congratulations or spout meaningless platitudes about my spectacular newfound wealth and soaring professional status. Instead, he simply stopped a few short feet away from me and gently extended his right hand, offering me a tall, steaming paper cup. The rich, exceptionally dark aroma of freshly roasted espresso drifted upward into the warm Georgia air, instantly triggering a sharp, visceral memory of Beatrice and Marcus standing maliciously over my marble kitchen counter. But as I looked closely at the pristine white plastic lid and the handwritten label clearly bearing my own name, the phantom anxiety evaporated from my rapidly racing mind. This specific brew is entirely safe, perfectly pure, and completely untampered with. Dr. Pierce stated, his voice a low, deeply reassuring murmur that firmly grounded me in the very beautiful present reality. I reached out without hesitation and took the cup directly from his steady hand, feeling the deeply comforting heat seep through the textured cardboard sleeve directly into my cold palms. I took a slow, highly deliberate sip of the rich, dark, steaming liquid, letting the bitter, beautifully unadulterated, and perfectly clean flavor wash over my tongue. It tasted exactly like absolute, undeniable vindication for me. I slowly lowered the warm cup and met his steady, intelligent gaze, sharing a genuine, completely unspoken smile of profound, unbreakable mutual respect. We stood quietly together in the bright, unfiltered afternoon sunlight. Two dedicated, unwavering professionals who had successfully exposed a truly ruthless monster, proudly looking forward to a bright, limitless future built entirely on solid, uncompromising truth and mutual trust. The transition from the sunlit plaza to the driver's seat of my brand new Aston Martin felt like stepping into an entirely different dimension. The low rumble of the twin-turbo engine vibrated through the supple leather seats, a mechanical purr that matched the steady, powerful rhythm of my own beating heart. I gripped the hand-stitched steering wheel, feeling the smooth texture under my fingertips as I guided the sleek vehicle away from the federal courthouse and into the bustling Atlanta traffic. The suffocating fog of psychiatric drugs, relentless gaslighting, and manufactured insanity was officially a relic of a distant, irrelevant past. Every street corner, every towering skyscraper, and every stretch of asphalt I passed now looked fundamentally different. The city was no longer a cage carefully constructed by the Preston family to keep me isolated and compliant. It was a sprawling open canvas waiting for my absolute command. I navigated the heavy afternoon congestion with effortless precision, the luxury car responding instantly to my slightest direction. The tinted windows shielded me from the chaotic outside world, creating a private, impenetrable sanctuary where I could finally breathe without constantly analyzing the hidden motives of the people around me. The air inside the cabin was cool and crisp, entirely devoid of the toxic, oppressive tension that had permeated every single room of my former marital home. I accelerated onto the highway, feeling the raw, unchecked power of the engine pulling me forward into a future I had single-handedly engineered from the ashes of their deceit. The navigation system directed me along a route that intentionally bypassed the sprawling industrial complex of the Fulton County Jail. As the massive, imposing concrete structure loomed into view on my right, I maintained my speed, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on the open road ahead. Behind those heavily fortified walls and razor wire fences, Marcus was currently experiencing the harsh, unforgiving reality of the federal justice system. The tailored Italian suits and arrogant boardroom monologues had been permanently traded for a coarse orange jumpsuit and the bleak, humiliating monotony of a high-security cell block. Beatrice was likely suffering a similar soul-crushing fate in a different facility, stripped of her aristocratic pretensions and completely cut off from the high society circles she worshipped. Chloe was drowning under the crushing weight of multiple wire fraud convictions, her superficial world of luxury handbags and elite alpine vacations entirely obliterated by her own reckless greed. I felt absolutely no urge to slow down, honk the horn, or cast a vindictive glance toward the bleak, windowless facility. The desire for petty gloating had completely vanished, replaced by a profound, impenetrable indifference. They were no longer the terrifying monsters who haunted my nights or the ruthless architects of my suffering. They were simply broken, irrelevant consequences of their own spectacular hubris, entirely removed from the trajectory of my new life. I pressed the accelerator slightly harder, leaving the grim concrete fortress fading rapidly in my rearview mirror. The highway gradually opened up, leading me toward the thriving technological epicenter of the city. I exited the interstate and glided down a pristine, tree-lined boulevard, the sleek Aston Martin catching the admiring glances of pedestrians and corporate executives alike. At the end of the manicured avenue stood a breathtaking monument to my hard-fought victory. The massive state-of-the-art corporate building rose into the sky, its gleaming glass facade reflecting the vibrant, limitless expanse of the Georgia sky. The architectural design was bold, innovative, and unapologetically dominant. Near the soaring entrance, mounted on a massive slab of polished black granite, were bold brushed steel letters spelling out my own name. It was not the Preston name, nor a subsidiary of Vanguard Technology. It was my identity boldly claiming its rightful place at the absolute pinnacle of the global health technology sector. I steered the car into the exclusive, secure underground parking facility, the heavy gates opening automatically as the advanced security system recognized my biometric profile. The quiet hum of the luxury engine echoed against the pristine concrete walls as I pulled into the premier parking space reserved exclusively for the chief executive officer. I turned off the ignition, the sudden silence providing a stark, beautiful contrast to the chaotic noise of my former life. I took a deep, steadying breath, letting the magnitude of the moment wash over my senses. I stepped out of the vehicle, the sharp click of my heels echoing authoritatively across the spotless garage floor. The dedicated security personnel stationed at the private elevator bank immediately stood at attention, offering respectful professional nods as I approached. They did not look at me with the manufactured pity or hidden contempt that Marcus's employees had always displayed. They looked at me with absolute reverence, recognizing the formidable intellect and sheer willpower required to build an empire from scratch. I entered the glass elevator, pressing the button for the top-floor executive suite. As the cab rapidly ascended, revealing breathtaking panoramic views of the city, I now commanded the final realization settled deep within my bones. The vulnerable, isolated scapegoat they had tried to systematically destroy was dead and buried. In her place stood an untouchable, fiercely independent queen. I had completely reclaimed my stolen health, legally secured my intellectual property, and established a staggering legacy that no one could ever diminish or manipulate. The elevator doors opened with a soft melodic chime, revealing a bustling, cutting-edge laboratory filled with brilliant minds working under my direct leadership. I stepped forward into the bright, energetic space, ready to shape the future of medical technology. The ultimate, perfectly executed revenge was not simply watching the Preston family lose everything they valued. The sweetest, most devastating revenge was moving forward, claiming my ultimate power, and forgetting they ever existed at all. My new life was beginning, and nobody would ever dictate my limits again. I smiled completely and wonderfully free, embracing the magnificent empire I built alone.